Coming to you from the heart of the Diocese of Savannah, this is It's Catholic, Y'all, a series of conversations about faith and life. Views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily represent the views of the Diocese of Savannah.
Welcome to It's Catholic, Y'all. I'm Braylon Snow, Assistant Director of Communications for the Diocese of Savannah. Joining us today in the studio is Beverly Willett. Beverly is an author, former lawyer, and a divorce reform advocate who has written frequently for our publication, The Southern Cross. Her book, Disassembly Required, a Memoir of Midlife Resurrection, is a story about rebuilding one's life after divorce. She has written about marriage and divorce for many publications, including The New York Times, USA Today, America, and First Things. She has spoken at TEDX Savannah on the topic of how to begin again, and is highly involved in Savannah at the Cathedral Basilica, the Flannery O'Connor Childhood Home, and has formerly served on the Homeless Authority Board. So we welcome Beverly to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you recently gave a talk for the Theology on Tap group. The theme was Panicked About the World and Politics? Do something even crazier and get married. It's quite a topic.
Well, I had a blast talking to them. I don't usually talk to groups of people that young, but I think millennials can really help the cause of marriage in our country today. And it was a wonderful evening.
That's great. Well, before we dive into the topic, marriage, martyrdom, and a messy world is how I'm putting it, I'd like to have you share a little bit more about your background.
Well, the older I get, the longer the story is, but I'll try and keep it short. I grew up in Maryland, and a very small rural town in Maryland. And it was really an idyllic childhood. I mean, I had an absolutely wonderful childhood. My grandfather was a Southern Baptist minister, so I grew up in the Baptist church. And I grew up surrounded by so many extended family members, and divorce was really unheard of. And the one divorce that there was in our community, it was viewed as a tragedy. We prayed for these people. It was really a tragic situation. I was first in my family to go to college. I saw lots of challenges in the marriages in my family growing up. But what I saw, which they modeled for me in terms of my view of marriage and how I viewed marriage myself, is that I saw couples going through challenges. I saw them praying to God about their difficulties, and I saw them coming out stronger. And so that's what I grew up seeing. I went to college, then I went on to law school, and I had spent a summer in New York City, and I thought that was the most exciting place in the world. So I went there to practice law with no idea of getting married anytime soon, but a year later, I was married. My husband was not Christian, he was Jewish, but he was non-practicing at the time. We practiced law. I practiced in the litigation area and also in the copyright area. Eventually, we had 2 children, 2 daughters. We bought our dream house, and we were doing pretty well. I will say that our marriages had challenges too, and that we had overcome so many of these challenges. So I really, when I went into marriage, for me, it was for life. It was permanent. And then about a little over 20 years ago, out of the blue, I found out he was having an affair, and 3 months later he was gone, filing for divorce, and never came home. That was a real just gut punch, complete shock for me, because I thought we were in a good place in our life. It was like we'd achieved the American dream, and then in a moment it just all imploded. So New York was the only state at the time that did not have no-fault divorce. This is a very complicated area. There are a couple of states now that have mutual no-fault divorce, meaning couples can decide together. But the other 48 states, it's unilateral, meaning one spouse can just decide it's broken and I'm out of here. New York did not have no-fault divorce at the time, which was kind of shocking for what we consider today a very blue state. And the reason for that is because the Catholic Church was so strong in New York that they had such influence with the legislature that for so many years, New York did not adopt no-fault divorce. I found all this out because I did not practice in the area of family law at all. I found all this out when I found myself in family court and divorce court. And it sort of gave me hope. It also gave me hope that I could fight my divorce. It wasn't inevitable. What I discovered going through this process is that even though no-fault divorce had not been officially adopted, the lawyers and the judges treated it as if it already had. They were not supportive of anyone trying to save their marriage. And that is something really that is the same way family courts across the country operate. It just completely shocked me that they wouldn't be in support of marriage and that they would actually, condemn someone that was trying to save their marriage. Ultimately, it's a very, very long story, but ultimately 6 years later, the divorce was final. I became, a full-time single mom. I had been a stay-at-home mom before. I had stopped working, practicing law at some point because I wanted to be able to see my children and kiss them goodnight. So, I was pretty much a single mom. I was writing at the time. I had already started building a writing career. And this really gave me something powerful to write about. I remember writing before my ex left, writing parenting articles and thinking, this is really not my avenue. I am a parent and I like writing these articles, but it's just not grabbing me enough that this is what I want to continue to write about. What happened is that really the sort of the worst suffering of my life provided wonderful material for me to examine, to write about, to exhibit the things that I had learned for other people, and to ultimately become an advocate for divorce reform, an advocate for marriage. And that's really what happened. I mean, there's about 15 years of writing, the kids growing up, and then moving to Savannah and continuing to build my writing career.
So you have written for us, being the Southern Cross, on several occasions. Your most recent article in the marriage issue has been highly popular, especially online. We've gotten a lot of views. I think it's our number one viewed article at the moment. So people are obviously very interested in this topic. I would like to give a general overview about the church's teaching on divorce, especially so we can separate fact from fiction a little bit, make sure everyone's on the same page about what the church actually teaches on divorce.
Sure. Well, there is no divorce in the Catholic Church. There are certain circumstances in which I'm not an expert on this, but there are certain circumstances in which separation is fine if there are areas of abuse and things like that. But in the Catholic Church, marriage is a sacrament. It's not just some contract. It's a sacrament and it's a covenant. So it is raised to a much higher level than what we see in just secular society. And it is a permanent sacred bond. As for me, when I got married, I believed that marriage was permanent and marriage was sacred because of the way that I had been raised. But becoming Catholic, which I did, I converted in 2018, my understanding of marriage and Christ's view of marriage and the place of marriage and the relationship of Christ to his bride, the church, just started unfolding and becoming deeper and deeper. Understanding marriage as a path to holiness, as a path to mutual sainthood. None of this was really sort of on my radar, maybe a little bit, but not as deeply as the Catholic Church understands it. And understands it scripturally, I find too. I get to turn to scripture and it's there. So that is the place that marriage holds in the Catholic Church. When we look at other churches outside the Catholic Church, or we look at just purely secular society with people who don't have any religious affiliations, we see that there is allowance for divorce, and it's not even that marriage is a contract even. I guess people think of it as a contract. Two people get together and they decide that they're going to get married. But really, it is an unenforceable contract. If you really think about it, the fact that we have no-fault divorce really means that people are getting together and they're deciding to have the legal status of marriage and the kind of things that implies in terms of tax implications or whatever, for as long as it's convenient for them to say we want to stay married. That's a huge gulf between what the Catholic Church believes, what is believed in secular society, how it's actually treated in our society and in our law today. That is enormous. And so I believe that the Catholic Church is the true guardian of marriage in our culture. We are the keepers of marriage in our culture.
What is, I guess, the history then in the United States anyway of divorce, including the reasons for the changes and then the aftermath of those changes?
So there's really always been divorce, but not at this level. And I think that if you look back, you'll find that there have been instances of divorce and people thinking that, they need to have some sort of strategy to get out of something that, is a difficult, maybe abusive relationship. Okay. But before we had no-fault divorce, which really sort of the ball started rolling in 1970, when no-fault divorce was enacted for the first time in California. Before that, we had a structure in our country that was based on fault. And that basically, it was, even though Catholics, didn't believe in divorce, and so this is separate. Catholics still don't have to divorce just because the option is there in the law. But there was an option in the law if a spouse could establish fault, if a spouse could establish something that was related to the breaking of the marital contract, as the spouses understood the marital contract, such that there was abuse, there was cruelty, there was abandonment, there was adultery, all of those things that indicate a breaking of a contract. And that is really what the law is about too. If you have any kind of contract, you have the ability to sue and say, okay, someone has broken this contract. There has to be some kind of cause of action. There has to be some kind of harm that has occurred. And so, the divorce laws were very much centered on justice. And then if someone would allege that there had been a breach of the contract, then there would be due process. There would be a trial. There would be an examination of the evidence, an examination to get to the truth of what happened. And so this actually was a very fair process that was infused with justice, I believe, and due process. Well, what happened is that I think you have to sort of look at this in the context of two things. One, what was happening in the divorce courts, in the family courts, and what was also happening in our society. So leading up to 1970, you've got the 60s, you've got the sexual revolution, you've got the beginnings of people saying, I want to be free to do what I want to do as an individual. And you start to see a breaking apart of a society that is founded on that is founded on community, and you start to see all these little I's. Everybody is very much concerned and attached to their I and what I want. And I think that really played a role in the development of no-fault divorce and how it started to roll across the country and how states one by one just adopted it. What you also saw in the divorce courts is, and this is what I have read, and I think that there's maybe some truth to it, but I think it can be overplayed as the reason why it needed to be. One is people getting out of abusive marriages and they couldn't, okay? And there possibly could be some truth to that, except to the extent that cruelty and abuse were always fault-based reasons for getting out of a marriage. Proving it, access to it, protections in terms of domestic violence laws, some of those protections weren't there, and we needed them. We have them now. So that, I think, is not as strong as an excuse as it used to be. The other thing is that they said that too many people wanted to get out of marriage and they had to make up a lie. Somebody had to take the rap. Somebody had to say, I'm guilty of adultery. I was cruel, when it wasn't true. And so they said, the system is making people perjure themselves. We can't have that. So we need to have no-fault divorce. Well, if that's true, and this is a reason given by, so many people over the last 50 years. If that's true, then why not have mutual no-fault divorce? Why not have a divorce system that says, okay, we're going to agree to end the marriage? If people were colluding, if spouses were colluding to perjure so that they could get out of the marriage, then we could have had mutual no-fault divorce. What we got was unilateral. What we got was one party choosing to divorce. That's the system that we got. Now, under no-fault divorce, as it exists now, there is mutual as well, but we know that the majority of the divorces are one person wants them. And often it is the person that is the wrongdoer. The wrongdoer is the plaintiff. That's not a true plaintiff. The plaintiff is a party who has been aggrieved. There is some kind of harm. There is some kind of broken law, broken commitment. That's the nature of a plaintiff. We have so many people who are plaintiffs who are actually the party who has caused the harm in the marriage, and they are the ones who have broken the covenant, and they get rewarded by a no-fault divorce and breaking apart a family.
So how has the culture been shaped by that? I mean, there's so many ways we could go with that, but I guess let's hit on the major changes.
Well, as I said, I think that it has, and this isn't the only thing, but it has enhanced our views of ourselves as individual. It has, my happiness is the most important thing. And if I'm not happy, then this is going to make me happy. So it has definitely shaped our culture because, I see in the literature, in the stories, all the time about people saying divorce is going to make me happy. Well, we know divorce doesn't make anyone happy. That's not the source and nature of happiness. But this has shaped our culture in terms of what we believe will bring us happiness. I think it has also added to the nature of our disposable society. We have become a disposable society economically in so many ways that we could talk about endlessly. And then that has started to translate into the environment. Okay, there's the disposability in terms of the problems with our environment. What has happened is we've taken this materialism in our society and it has now grafted onto our relationships. It's not just disposing of our old clothes or things that we think aren't making us happy anymore. We are now disposing of our relationships, the most precious things that should be the most precious things in the world that God has given us. We are now disposing of those and treating it as disposable. And I think that is probably one of the biggest impacts that these laws have had on our society. I'm just trying to think of, just in terms of divorce itself, back when the laws were first enacted in the 70s, and by the way, between 1970 and 1985, most states had adopted no-fault divorce. So it just rolled out very, very quickly. New York adopted no-fault divorce in 2010. So in the very beginning, we did not have social science research to show what the impact of these laws would be. Actually, if you look at some of the literature and the history too, you will find out that there were some people that wanted to enact these laws because they thought that if parties had less acrimony between them, because the system before caused people to argue, that they would be able to resolve their problems and reconcile. So actually, they thought that the divorce rate was going to come down even further with these no-fault divorce laws. And there was some interest in California and elsewhere with these courts called conciliation courts, where judges and people were actually trying to save marriages. And some of these things were like working. And there was some thought that maybe that would grow. Well, that didn't happen. And what we wound up happening was that the divorce rate like doubled almost overnight. It's come down a little bit, but that's only because I believe that the marriage rate has also taken a nosedive and people are cohabitating more than ever. So we didn't have the research to show what the impact was going to be. Now we have a tremendous amount of research that shows that divorced couples, divorced families are well off economically, that women and children in particularly have greater rates of poverty. We find that men who are divorced have higher rates of suicide. We find children, the impact on children of divorce is unbelievable. Higher rates of incarceration, higher rates of less educational attainments, higher rates of suicide, higher rates of teenage pregnancy, poverty, and generational divorce, which means what we're seeing is a family is divorced and there's an impact on the children that they will also have greater rates of divorce. And then it just keeps going on and on. And this research is solid. This is solid. We have this research now of all these impacts on our culture. And we see politically money being thrown after education or thrown after poverty and whatever, without focusing on one of the root causes, without any policymakers really focusing on one of the root causes of all of the economic and social problems that we're seeing in our society.
We can see the same logic, so to speak, with the abortion issue. People thinking before we make it used to be safe, legal, and rare. In their mind, that was supposed to prevent it, and we know that didn't happen. So same thing looks like it was a case with divorce. Like if we make it easier, maybe it'll help it. So that's interesting. I didn't know that.
It is, and I think what happens then is it gets us away from looking at the core value of what we're talking about. And we're saying, well, let's just not worry about that, about marriage is supposed to be sacred and whatever. Let's just try and have a short-term kind of fix that'll help it. No, you need to focus on it head on and look at it.
Yeah.
So I agree.
So shifting gears toward, I guess, the positive side, we're going to shift into the marriage itself. In your opinion, how can a person know if they are called to be married? What advice might you have for someone who's trying to find a spouse, especially in the Catholic Church?
It's a very big topic, and I would say probably if I go back to me and my head in my 20s, I would have said go find your soulmate and someone that you have a lot in common with, and because that's really sort of, even though I grew up in the Baptist church, that's sort of what happened. I fell head over heels in love, and we had a lot in common, and I still don't think that was necessarily the wrong thing, but I didn't really discern about this person. And I remember my mother telling me when my ex left and filed for divorce, she said, you were very headstrong, and we knew you were in love, and your father and I decided that we weren't going to say a word because we thought you'd cut us off because you were so in love. And they didn't say anything. And she's probably right. I wouldn't have changed my mind. She said, we just knew you weren't going to change your mind, so we didn't say anything. But maybe they should have said something. However, I don't regret what I did. But I will say that I have learned, going through divorce, coming to the Catholic Church, I wouldn't not be married to my ex, but I have come to understand that with everything in my life, with every article I write, everything I do, I have come to understand that I need to start. Need just sounds. But I want to start with Scripture. That is that is the place to go first, is to start with Scripture. Go to Scripture, go to prayer, know who you are, really know who you are. Meditate, go on silent retreats. I mean, I'm a big believer in being able to discern a lot on a silent retreat when you can't talk and you don't have any other thing, coming at you. You can really hear yourself and really examine yourself in prayer. And so I would say those are the things that people should be doing, and be patient. We're a society too that is just running off to do things. We've got to do things. So I think that there is a lot of merit in patience, a lot of merit in waiting. And if you look at that, going back just to the divorce laws for a moment, in addition to the whole way that we divorce in society and the laws, what also happened is we used to have waiting periods in the law before a divorce could be granted. Okay. And I've written articles on this because I think it's just so intuitive that when you take your time, when you are patient, when you're not in the heat of the moment, whether it's the heat of the moment in anger or the heat of the moment in love and in passion, when you take a pause and you allow there to be a pause, that pause can be so fruitful. It can open up so much. And there is evidence that with a pause, that couples in crisis can actually learn how to repair their marriages and can actually reconcile. What we've seen, though, with the laws, however, is that the waiting periods to get a divorce, they've gone down, down, down across the country. And so I believe that has also impacted the rise in divorce, in our attitudes, in everything. In Georgia, where we are, the waiting period is 30 days. Now, a lot of other things have to happen, and it may not be resolved in 30 days, but it could be. It could be. It's April now, May, divorce. Doesn't matter if you have children. That is shocking. And it just goes against intuition. It goes against, whether you're religious or not. I mean, it just goes against everything that really is smart and thoughtful. Anyway, so I don't know if I asked you about dating and, I had a friend who did, I don't really know about dating. I can't give dating advice, but other than what I've said, I just don't think that lining up all your wishes and your wants is the way to do it in terms of, Match.com or Catholic Match or whatever. And I know that that's how the society has gotten. But I think, as I said, I have a friend who wrote a dating book and said, let's just go back to the old ways. Ask the people that you know who know you, who they know. And that used to be a way that people met. They met at work, or they met at church, or they met through things that they were involved in where they found like-minded people. And so I would just say, I think we have to go back to being open to those kinds of avenues to meet people.
So what do you think some of the major roadblocks for people getting or wanting to get married, both inside and outside the church, are right now?
Well, I would say I think all of these roadblocks are sort of self-driven and self-induced. You can go down to the courthouse, and if you know someone you want to marry and they want to marry you, and get the application for the license and find somebody who can marry you tomorrow. I mean, I don't think that there are any true legal, unless you're married to somebody else, legal or monetary roadblocks to getting married. And so I think that for people who have found someone that they want to be their life partner, that the roadblocks are self-induced. And I think one of the big ones is fear. Fear of making a commitment. Fear of everything that we've seen in our culture, and that we're fed in our culture, in our media and everything else, about relationships falling apart, about the hardships. We see all of the things, the negatives. We see so many negatives in our culture. And so I think that fear is a big impediment, but that's self-driven. The fear is something that's coming from inside us. It's not coming from outside. It's also coming from the fact that we have a generation of young people who probably, their parents went through a divorce. And certainly, even if it's not their parents who've gone through divorce, they know lots of people. They know lots of people in their family. They know lots of people in their churches or whatever who've gone through divorce. And so it is on the radar. We see all of that, and we don't necessarily see the examples of the joy, the examples of the relationships that have made it and what marriage provides. We don't see all this positive evidence. It's there. It's there in our culture. I don't think that our media and that we don't do a good job as Catholics either. We celebrate the 25th and 50th wedding anniversaries in February, which is really a glorious thing. I remember the first time that I went to one, I just stumbled on it because I thought I went to the 11:30 Mass, and I thought it was going to be the 11:30 Mass. And all of a sudden there were all these couples renewing their vows. And I thought I would be one of them one day. And I was just sobbing. I was just sobbing through the whole thing. It was just so hard for me. Now it's like one of my favorite things because I think it's so beautiful. There's such beauty there. And I remember seeing some of the faces. I look at some of the people when they renew their vows and they turn their faces to one another. And you can just see that there's still that spark of true love and devotion that they had 50 years ago. We need to see that in our society. We need to bring out all of the wisdom that those people have. And it needs to not just be one Sunday a year where most of the people there are just the couples renewing their vows or their friends who come along. They're not all the other people who are fearful, the younger people who are fearful of getting married and don't see these examples. So we need to find a way of getting that out into the culture and making it very visible. I have a very good friend who's actually close to my age. And even though, I didn't grow up with divorce, she told me that she had never seen in her own family and among her friends an example of a good marriage. And that just shocked me for someone my age not seeing it either. So it's not just younger people, older people too. And she's never been married. But I think that's a huge thing, because I think that that drives some of the fear, seeing all the negativity. I think also, and what we know from a lot of the research is that people are putting marriage off because they feel like they need to succeed in their career first. They need to succeed in their career first. And they need to have enough money to get married. And marriage then becomes like this capstone, this next thing to achieve, rather than growing together and saying, I remember, my mom saying, God will always find a way. And so it's not only fear, but it's a lack of faith. It's a lack of going. If you discern that God is laying on your heart to be married, then you need to have the faith that, as long as you're not completely careless with your money and throwing it away, then you need to also have the faith that God is going to be there in the midst of that union and a relationship to help you figure out the way to do it. So I think the order has gotten wrong. People used to marry younger and grow together in the challenges that they might face economically, rather than feeling like they got to have it all figured out or so much of it figured out before they can possibly get married. I remember my mother telling me too that a week, I forget what my father was doing at the time, but a week after they got married, he lost his job. And I don't know, my grandparents were, he became a minister, but at the time he was a crazy motorcycle driver. I don't know. And he and my grandmother, they didn't have 2 dimes, I remember him too, much older when the kids were grown, and, he was a minister. He founded 2 churches, and he would always be giving loans to people or just giving his money away. And his wife, my grandmother, would say, Jim, you just can't do that anymore. And he'd say, Louise, the Lord will provide. And that, I think of I'm going to get emotional here. I think of anything in my life that has stuck with me more is my grandfather. Hearing my grandfather say, Louise, the Lord will provide. And miraculously, he always did for them. And they didn't have a lot economically, but what a beautiful life. And what a beautiful example of faith that they gave me. Sorry.
That's great.
Getting a little choked up here. But I think that there are probably stories out there like that. With these couples celebrating these long-term anniversaries, especially in the Catholic Church. And I think we need to hear those stories, because there could be a lot of people in our culture, young people thinking about marriage, who've never heard a story like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that is, as I said, everything is so negative. We need to get these positive stories out there because they're beautiful, and then they're inspiring. And these couples also can be mentors. I mean, how can we take, some older couples who are maybe retired, maybe looking for a place to serve in the church, and growing this as an avenue of service in the church for younger people.
So what does make this issue so important for the church to address? I'm thinking of our diocese here. We have our Georgia martyrs who were very much, I guess, you can kind of see them as an icon for marriage and how they defended it. So what makes it so important for just the church itself to address marriage?
Well, we've talked about all of the problems in the culture, and something needs to change. We need to become a marriage-centric society. We are not a marriage-centric society. And because of the unique way that marriage is treated and the way that Catholics believe, then I think it is incumbent upon Catholics to lead in this area. Unfortunately, if you look at not only what's happening in marriage in terms of divorce rates, cohabitation is up, you will see over time, over the last 5 decades, you will see that Catholic marriages and marriage in the Catholic Church is trending with the culture. Okay, so the number I know it's in, I don't know off the top of my head the numbers. It's in my article that I wrote for the Southern Cross in March about marriage. But the number of marriages in the Catholic Church in the last 40 years have just been sliding down. I mean, it's not a little slide. It is an enormous slide of people getting married in the Catholic Church from a high of close to 500,000, 40 years ago, something like that, now down to about 100,000. So we see the trend in our culture that marriage generally is under 50%. That's the lowest rate in recorded history. We see Catholic marriage tracking that. There is no divorce in the Catholic Church, but lots of people, when, think of annulment as Catholic divorce. Quote, I'm putting that in quotes. And that is even Catholics that I've talked to. It's sort of and certainly in the culture, if someone is not Catholic, that is how so many people view it. It's just oh, that's just like what the Catholics call it, the annulments. You look at the annulments, you look at the number of annulments as the number of marriages have gone down, the number of annulments have gone the other direction, have gone way up. So it's important for the Catholic Church, as I said, because we're the guardians of marriage, and we have not been leading in the culture. We have been following in the culture and letting the culture become the place that we take our cues from. I'm not talking everyone, but I'm talking generally. When you look at all these statistics, that's really where it comes out. We're not the leaders anymore. We're the followers. And that's huge. That's a huge turnaround. And you mentioned the Georgia martyrs, and I'll try and just you may have had someone speak on this before, but I'll give sort of the little summary. These were Franciscan friars who came to southern Georgia back in the late 1500s, and they established missions along the Georgia coast. And things were going very well with the local Guale tribe. And at some point, and the Guale tribe, many of them became baptized converts to the Catholic faith. But traditionally, they had more than one marriage. And one of the leaders who was in line to become the ultimate leader came to one of the friars and said he wanted to take a second wife, because apparently the more wives you had too, it was sort of matriarchal, you had more money and you could get ahead further in the chiefdom. And the friar said, "You're a baptized Catholic. You can't take a second wife." And so he was beheaded. He was beheaded, and then the tribe, they went from mission to mission, beheading all of the other. They took one in captivity, of the other friars. It's been a very, very, very long process, but they were just declared martyrs of the Catholic Church. I think that's huge, because if you look at that, they are actually the first martyrs for marriage on American soil. That's enormous. That's enormous. It's an enormous gift our Lord has given us. An incredible example. Nobody anymore is going to be willing to die for marriage. I mean, that is like, people don't even stand up for their marriage or dispute it or anything. And these martyrs died for the faith and died for the sacrament. That is enormous. And I think it's wonderful that it's why we're given these saints, to look at them as examples. And what we're called to do is so far less than what they were called to do. Christ gave his life for his church, his bride. That's who we are. That's who we are as Catholics.
Well, there's a quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but there's an idea that God sends saints who contradict the culture the most at the time that we need them the most.
Oh, I want that quote.
We'll have to put the real one somewhere.
Wow. Well, God always sends what we need at the time we need it, when we don't know it sometimes, or think we need it. It's just like, for me, it was a real long process for me to understand and grasp the fact that my suffering, the suffering that I went through, and I thought I was going to reconcile, and I didn't, that was for a greater purpose, that God had this greater plan in mind for me and gave this to me as a gift. As a gift, not only to try and help other people, to try and stand up for marriage, but as a gift for my growth. So, while I was talking about, I don't regret marrying, in some way I have to say now, how can I regret the divorce if I believe that following this path ultimately led me to the Catholic Church and to growing in understanding of what marriage is and in my own spiritual journey toward holiness? That's an amazing gift. So now I have to look back and see that worst thing that ever happened in my life has brought all of this. And how could I refuse God's gift?
It's wonderful. I want to tackle some of the fears that we've been talking about, because, as we said at the beginning, marriage, martyrdom, in a messy world. There are a lot of people panicking right now. A lot of people who think, why would I get married in a time where everyone's in the hookup culture, where marriage is not celebrated, and the world might explode in 5 minutes. That's kind of there's a lot of that going on in the news and everything seeming scary. We all know that life's never been easy, no matter what. I have a book actually that I love. It's called The Good Old Days, They Were Terrible. So I read that for context whenever I get overwhelmed by the news. But people have always found a way to get married. Think of people, the World War II brides and all these people. It's like, no matter what, people have always found a way to start a family in horrific circumstances. But on the flip side, we also can look at the early church, where many believers chose not even to marry at all because they expected Jesus would be coming back anytime. So we kind of have this tension, which can cause fear. How do we promote marriage when the future is so uncertain, but our faith is in the Lord?
Okay. I want to pick up on that word, uncertain. As if the time in which we live is something other than any other time throughout history in which any human has ever lived. And there's never been a time where circumstances have been perfect. We We know that the consequences of sin mean that this is the kind of culture that we're going to live in. And there's never a time when it's going to be a little more perfect than it is now. There are always going to be problems. There are always going to be obstacles. And, as I learned, when I was selling my house and, after going through the divorce, and then the kids grow up and it's like, oh, I have the empty nest. And then I can't pay the mortgage anymore, and I'm losing the house. And it just seems like one of the things that I realized about myself on this journey is that I was trying to grasp onto things, to hold on to them, because I thought if I can fix things, if I can have more certainty that's going to be good, and I'll be okay, right? And then things just kept happening. As I said, well, the kids grow up. I get older. I can't stay the same. I can't predict if I'm going to have a car accident, which I did right before my book launched 5 years ago. I grew to understand that absolutely everything is uncertain at every single moment of every day. There is nothing that I can do myself to create certainty in anything. The only thing that is certain, the only thing that does not change is God. That's it. Everything else is uncertain and out of my control. Yes, of course I can try and pay my bills on time and make sure that, there's a better likelihood that my credit score is better, or there are always things that we can do to try and improve things. And we shouldn't not do them. Of course we should. But we need to come to grips. And this was a huge thing for me, to understand that life is completely uncertain. And it's not in my control. It's in God's control. God has got the whole thing. And so it allows me now in my life and I still worry. Of course I still worry. So, of course I get upset sometimes and worry. That's our human nature. Until I say, remember, God's in control. Remember, it's uncertain. It's all uncertain. This is the natural way of life. And we need to be able to learn how to live in the midst of uncertainty with joy and with giving over of our troubles to the Lord. And so that has been a huge, huge revelation to me, because the more that we try and control things and try and achieve certainty, which is not achievable, what we wind up doing is we are grasping onto things, and we're trying to hold them on, and we're trying to sort of tamp them down and make them fixed and unchanging. And the fear, the pain, the stress arises when something happens, when those things change or become unfixed. And then we try and grasp them on again. It's just like people who have get married again and again. They don't want to sit with the pain of a broken relationship and learn from it. They need to go out and find someone else to make them happy, because we need to take the pain away. Because, that's, I think, where the pain is mostly coming from, our self-grasping after trying to make things certain without understanding the nature of them, and that is uncertainty. And that to me that was a really hard thing to do. That created a lot of freedom and joy in my life. I thought selling my house was going to be the next worst thing that ever happened to me. And when I started to understand this, I started just giving things away. I mean, I can't tell you the things that I just gave away, and how having less and having things sort of taken from me didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom opening up. And so I think too, going back to your question about marriage, I mean, how are we thinking about marriage? Are we thinking about marriage positively? Are we thinking about, oh, I've got to commit to someone, and now we have joint bills and we have children and we have all of these things? Or am I looking at this as an amazing opportunity for my growth, an amazing opportunity for the things that I'm going to learn? I have this partner who is going to help me achieve sainthood, and I get to do the same thing. And we get to encounter all of these challenges and all these uncertain things in our life, pray to God for help. And who knows what we're going to learn from this. I have learned so much by allowing myself to give into this uncertainty. Just my spiritual, journey alone to Catholicism, and look where it's landed. So I think we need to start changing our thinking, and really understanding the nature of uncertainty.
It's beautiful. You're gonna make me cry. Most people, like we said, have been affected by divorce in some way. How can we support people who've been through that?
Well, again, I mean, I just reiterate what I said in terms of mentors in the church, and we do have some programs in the church for people healing from divorce. And I think we need to have more of those programs. But let me just hope it's okay if I go off a little bit, because there was something I wanted to add. And that is, we do have some of these healing ministries, but I think one group, I would say, that has been mostly ignored in the church has been those group of people whose marriages have broken apart through no fault of their own. And I'm not saying that, everybody doesn't contribute to some discord in a marriage. That's not what I'm trying to say in terms of using the word fault. I'm talking about they were not the ones that pursued it. They were not the person having the affair or whatever. And they have been sort of divorced against their will. And in some cases, with annulments in the Catholic Church, the people who were the having the affair have gone on to get their annulments. And there are people in the church who, despite what has happened in terms of a civil divorce, but despite what has happened if there's been an annulment in the church, they are continuing to hold fast to their marriage vows. As Catholics, they believe that their marriage is sacred and permanent, and they are continuing to stand for their marriage. And when I wasn't Catholic at the time, but when I stood for my own marriage, my vows were independent of my ex-husband's vows. So it wasn't like him breaking his vows gave me license to break mine, and I'd say, great, yeah, now I can do what I want because he's doing what he wants. I didn't view it that way at all. And there's so many people in the church who are grieving because they don't believe that the church is supporting them in their stand for marriage. I mean, they are truly modern day martyrs for marriage. They are just like the Georgia martyrs. They are the modern martyrs for marriage. And I believe that the church needs to recognize them, needs to honor them, needs to minister to them, and to use them. If we're going to have, I think we need a revival for marriage, a national revival for marriage. And these are people who the church can use in that revival. And so I think that is, when you're talking about healing, I think that is a place that we really need healing to be.
Do you think that the Eucharistic revival will help? I mean, it has to help everything, but especially lead into something like that? Can you imagine, with more people viewing the real presence as a reality, that changes everything in how we view the sacraments too?
Well, I hope so, because I mean, marriage is a sacrament. Mm-hmm. There are 7 of them, right? So we haven't really been focusing on marriage as a sacrament. So I'm hoping that it will. But there is a lot of resistance, and there is a lot of following the culture, even within the church. So I think we need Catholic priests and bishops who are going to lead in this area too. I think that the faithful need to see leadership coming from the top as well, and a joint effort to that. This is a little different, but it made me think of it. Two questions back, I think. Do we have time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say, when you're talking about, people, why should they get married? And the talk that I'd given to Theology on Tap about get married, it sounds crazy, whatever. But I think if you think about our culture also, even though we have, a lot of negativity going on, we are still drawn to heroes in our culture. I think we're a very hero-focused culture, even if you just look at the media and movies and things like that. And so in terms of young people getting married and taking that leap, I think we need to talk about that leap of faith too. I think that one amazing thing could be if they could start seeing that they actually can be part of the heroes too, not just the standers, but even if they have suffered from generational divorce themselves, that they can actually start to change the culture by getting married, by showing their friends, by being examples to their friends, because so many kids don't. So are so many young people. Not kids, young people, don't have these examples of good, solid marriages. They can be examples for their friends. If they have children, they can start to change the generation, and they can start to grow a new generation of children who grow up with intact parents and have models of marriage for themselves. And so I think we can change the culture. And I think being part of that and seeing that you can be part of a change like that is exciting. And I don't think it's a message that young people are hearing about how they can be part of the change.
Okay, so for people who are interested in finding out your writing or finding your writing or other resources, what can they do? How can they find your books? How can they hear your talks? Or any other resources you might recommend?
So they can go to my website, Beverly Willett, that's WILLETT.com. And I may not have everything there, but I try and load up every article, every podcast. It should mostly be there. It's all there. With a heading to read. I write for a variety of publications. It's there. You can also go to the Coalition for Divorce Reform, which is a volunteer organization that I helped start over a decade ago. And we have a lot of resources there in terms of understanding marriage. We have a lot of marriage educators and academics who write articles on our blog. So that is definitely a place to look for information as well. And my book, Disassembly Required, a Memoir of Midlife Resurrection, you can find on Amazon and wherever.
Great. Well, we could talk for another 2 hours, but we're not going to do this time. We'll have to have you back someday. Beverly, thank you so much for sharing this. It's very helpful. It's very convicting, and it's very exciting to think about what could be. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. It's been fun.
This has been an episode of It's Catholic, Y'all. Visit us at diosav.org or on our Diosav social media platforms for more.